Have you ever wanted to know what it'd be like to train like a bodybuilder? Or would you just like to incorporate some bodybuilding style training into your hybrid training routine? Today, I'm going to be talking about my experience with bodybuilding, how you can integrate bodybuilding into your training routine, some of the common mistakes to avoid, and some of the physical and psychological benefits that you are going to experience from integrating bodybuilding into your hybrid training routine. I will also be giving you a bit of a sample program of what this may look like across a training week. If you've been loving my content and you want to continue to see content in future, make sure you hit subscribe and the notification bell so you can stay up to date with all the content that comes out. And if you like what you see in the video today, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Without further ado, let's talk about my experience with bodybuilding and how I dipped my toes into this world. So like the majority of young lads and lasses that get into the gym, a massive part of my own motivation to train was to increase my own self-confidence because I wasn't happy with the way I looked. Ever since competing in sports as a young kid, and particularly in swimming, I became very aware of how my body looked, and I often compared my own body to the people around me, or even to the stars in some of the movies that I watched. Now, given that the sport of bodybuilding is based on visual performance, how you actually look on a stage, and that is what you're being judged on, it makes sense to engage with a style of training that focuses on improving your physical appearance by improving your body composition. So like any young guy who wants to build muscle and burn fat, before I ever became a personal trainer, I jumped on YouTube. In the big wide world of YouTube, there is a lot to learn. Some of it good, and as a matter of fact, I would say that it is increasingly getting better. However, back in the day, a lot of the bodybuilding advice that a young guy would see on the internet was from some juiced up gym bodybuilding gurus that were just giving you the training routine that worked for them, and any sort of training or nutrition advice was very bro science based. However, these guys were very motivational, and I actually learned a fair bit back in those days. I did plenty of things wrong. I wouldn't say I had the best technique with the training that I was doing, but I think for anyone who really wants to change the way they look, trying to perfect your training routine or diet before actually just doing it consistently is going to hold you back from getting results. Whilst I hate to admit it, after finishing a bachelor's degree in exercise and sports science, I slowly realized that consistency and hard work gets the majority of results. And the idea of using science for training can give you that bit more edge, and it can help you to do things a lot more safely and sustainably over time. However, if you're not willing to put the time, effort, and consistency into your training, nutrition, your recovery, you're just not going to see any sort of results. You can design the most science-backed routine, but if you don't do it, it's not going to work. Anyway, bit of a segue there. So as I said, my main interest with bodybuilding training was to improve my physical appearance so I could feel more self-confident. And like the majority of us, it was largely based on the fact that I wanted to be more physically attractive to the opposite sex. And for any of you that want to be more attractive to the same sex, that is perfectly fine too. So as I said, my journey with bodybuilding started by looking at it on YouTube, and I started training in a little Snap Fitness gym. And I probably spent about 12 to 18 months training here before I actually became a personal trainer and started training in the gym that I was working at, which was a Good Life. Now, if you didn't watch last week's video already, I discussed that the first thing that I really got into was powerlifting training when I joined this gym, but bodybuilding still had a large emphasis in my training because if you can build a bigger muscle, you can also build a stronger muscle. Now, being that a bodybuilding competition was the second thing that I wanted to cross off my little training fitness bucket list, the same year that I competed in these two powerlifting novice competitions, I signed up for a men's fitness competition. Now, if you look at men's fitness, men's physique, men's bodybuilding, largely the difference between these categories is how much muscle these guys have and how lean they are. So with the men's fitness category, basically you're looking to be that pretty boy model standing up there in your togs. You'll be quite lean, you've got a little bit of muscle mass, but you're not significantly jacked like some of these physique and bodybuilder categories. So why did I actually put the bodybuilding competition on my bucket list? To be honest with you, it was a challenge for myself, but who wouldn't enter a competition where your goal is to look visually or physically as good as possible? I mean, that was one of my primary goals when I got into training. However, like a lot of things in life, you look at the outcome. You look at the blokes on the stage or the Instagram pictures and you think, wow, I want to look like that. But you're only looking at the tip of the iceberg. Now, whilst for training for my Muay Thai fight last year was probably the hardest training I've done, prior to doing that, preparing for this bodybuilding competition was absolutely gnarly. This wasn't only from a physical perspective, but from a psychological perspective as well. So let's dive into some of the challenges and lessons that I learned during this bodybuilding prep. Again, for this competition, I did hire a coach, although he wasn't super hands-on the training side of things or the nutrition either. We just kind of checked in, made sure I was losing body fat, and realistically, when I look at a lot of the advice, I guess it was fit for what I was doing. But if you were looking to compete in bodybuilding or take this sport more seriously, I would look at investing in a really good coach. So do your research, because there was a lot of things that occurred to me during this period and coming out of this period that I felt like I didn't really have anyone to talk to about. I didn't really have anyone in my corner. And this caused me a lot of physical and psychological issues. So when it comes to the actual lead up to the event, obviously the idea is to reduce as much body fat as you can, so you're as lean as you can be on stage, so you're revealing as much muscle mass as possible. Now, don't get me wrong, you've obviously got phases for recurring competitors where they have massing or building phases and then they diet down, reduce body fat, and they peak that when it comes into competition. Now, given that I'd already competed in powerlifting and I'd had my time putting on weight and putting on a bit of muscle, I kind of had my foundation, and I definitely was not the most muscular guy out there. Largely the focus was dieting down and revealing what that muscle actually looked like under the bright lights with a spray tan in my dick togs. Actually, they weren't dick togs, they were more like swim trunks. So initially when it came to the training side of things and I wasn't in that large of a calorie deficit, it wasn't too bad at that point. I had a fair bit more energy to work with for training. Sure enough, I was still quite reliant on caffeine, so that definitely got me through some of the sessions. But when my calories started to drop down even more, I noticed more and more how fatigued I was getting. I increased my caffeine intake and I started to get a lot more issues with hunger. And the things I started to do with my diet approach, I probably wouldn't recommend to anyone else. And it's not because that it didn't work, it just really put me in a fucked headspace. So as I started to become more and more hungry and I was stubborn enough to stick to this goal, I started to become so food focused. Anyone who's competed will tell you that they've sat there on their TikTok or their Instagram just scrolling through food. You might open up Uber Eats just to see what you could order, but you don't actually wind up ordering anything. Don't get me wrong, I did have a flexible approach to my nutrition, but there was definitely times that I wanted to eat a lot more than I was actually having. So when it came to this approach that came about, I started doing a lot more intermittent fasting, which I thought was a great idea. But once my intermittent fasting became 1 meal a day, and I was literally eating like 2,400 calories in one meal of high volume food, I became so fixated at this point of my day where I got to sit down, watch TV, and just feast away on my food, that it became like the center, the focus of my universe at the time. Now, not only that, the other thing that was obviously the center of my focus in my world at the time was how I appeared. This was the first time I actually started to get my leanness at that point in my life, and I became so hyper-focused on my visual appearance. That meant I was checking in the mirror more how I looked. I started grabbing at my fat on my abdomen to see if I was getting leaner. I was looking at photos of myself, looking at myself in training videos. My whole world just got taken over by my fixation on my food, my training, and my body image. And for any of you watching that have competed, I'm sure you can agree this is probably a place that you've been to as well. And it is not fun. So those were probably the more challenging parts of the training for this bodybuilding competition when it came to the psychological components. I had a really fucked up relationship with food, and I was so obsessed with my body image, and it led to an extremely unhealthy amount of body checking throughout the day during this prep. Now, when it came to the physical side of things, like I said, I started to get really hungry, and that does get uncomfortable, and it starts to affect your mood as well. But what I found more challenging was giving the energy to my business and my clients, and trying to maintain my performance when it came to my training. I didn't have as much physical energy coming into my body, so I wasn't able to exert as much. This is what happens when you get to some of the later stages of dieting, when you're in a deep deficit for a prolonged period of time. Your body is trying to compensate for this lack in energy by deregulating how active you are. You tend to notice yourself leaning on things more, you're sitting down a lot more. If there's any option to take an escalator or a lift over the stairs, you're probably going to choose that too. In saying that, this prep probably built a lot of mental toughness for me, because I kind of always saw that as a challenge. Regardless of how fatigued I felt, I would start to push for that the majority of the time. So physically, I was just super fatigued. My strength started to go down in the gym, and I remember towards the end of prep, it just became about trying to get a good pump and stimulate my muscles. I was not as worried about how heavy I was lifting. One thing that you start to notice with your training too, when you're not looking after your nutrition, or just as a really a byproduct of being in a calorie deficit, is that you start to get less pumps from your training as well. You have phases where you haven't had a refeed in a while, where you've increased your carbohydrate intake, and you're blasting your music and drinking your caffeine and trying to get through this training session, and you don't even get rewarded with that nice pump where you walk out of the gym feeling super jacked. You just kind of like, I feel depleted and like a string bean. So that was probably a shit physical component in it as well. There was no reward from the training I was doing, or it didn't seem like it at the time. Basically, the reward is waking up leaner each morning. And to be honest with you, a lot of the time, that is what gets you through. Sometimes the outcome of just seeing less body fat, maybe a new vein popping up or some muscle striations, is the thing that makes you go, oh, I think it's worth it. So given that I was feeling a lot more fatigued, my training performance went down, my pumps didn't feel as good. My interest at training at that point was basically from a survival standpoint. It wasn't really to improve, it was just to get myself across the line. And one thing I recall at the end of these sessions was always having to do my cardio, which I absolutely dreaded. I would be walking up the treadmill on an incline, keeping my heart rate in zone 2, watching Star Trek, and I also recall watching all these movie breakdowns of the Marvel movies at the time. Once one of these movies had come out, there'd be some YouTube review on what they think's gonna happen. And that was how I was distracting myself from the sheer fact that I did not want to be on the treadmill doing cardio. I just wanted to sit down, sleep, and eat food. Now I know I'm not really selling bodybuilding to you at point, but please acknowledge I wasn't doing all the right things with my nutrition. If I was to do it again now, I'd definitely adjust my nutritional approach, and I'd be smarter with how I trained and how I scheduled my lifestyle in general. So let's discuss how bodybuilding actually impacted my fitness and health. So largely when it comes to my fitness, I really didn't see much improvements in performance, and that's because I was competing in a physique-based sport. We're not assessing maximal strength or your endurance or any sort of skill here. You're being assessed on your ability to conduct and move the lean body that you have built and the muscle that have you built on a stage, whilst you have a cheeky smile the whole time, so the judges love you and hopefully put you on the podium. I dare say I did not build any sort of muscle mass in this time. In fact, I probably lost a fair bit. I definitely didn't get stronger. I probably had some sort of aerobic adaptations, given that I wasn't doing a whole lot of cardio before this. But realistically, from a performance standpoint, I didn't see a whole lot of gain. Now, when it comes to the psychological benefits, as much as my food relationship got fucked up and I became so obsessed with how I looked, psychologically I built so much toughness and resilience. Like the amount of time that I had to endure hunger and go to bed hungry, wake up hungry, still manage to run a business and do study, all while in a depleted state. It took a lot for me psychologically to just keep doing this and finish what I started. As a matter of fact, the only time that I felt like quitting was when I came back from Bali, which was the stupidest thing that I did from this comp. I went to Bali 2 weeks prior to competing, and probably the only thing that saved me over there was the fact that I got Bali belly. So for like 3 or 4 days, I wasn't really eating much. And it's not like my food was shit, but I wasn't tracking calories or anything like that. But when I got back, I was just like, can I do this for another 2 weeks? I ummed and ahed, and I wound up just biting the bullet, doing the other 2 weeks, and then going to the competition. So something that I do want to reinforce is that whilst this competition did cause me a lot of harm when it came to my relationship with food and my own body image, is probably one of the most testing things that I have done in my life. It helped me to build a lot of mental toughness and resilience, and I've been able to use that in other aspects of my life as well. So I think that's definitely something to be gained from this. And if you were planning to have a more long-term career or commit to hypertrophy training more, you're not always going to be in phases of fat loss. And even when you are and your nutrition is done right, it's not going to be as bad as this was for me. Now, finally, one last thing that I want to touch on is just how bodybuilding differs from powerlifting. As I've stated, the difference between a powerlifting and a bodybuilding competition is the sheer fact that in a powerlifting competition, you're being assessed on maximal strength, and you have a certain technique that you need to abide by on your squat, bench, and deadlift. And when it comes to bodybuilding, you're being assessed on your visual appearance. However, this is not just subject to how much muscle you have and how little body fat you have, but it's how you conduct yourself on the stage as well. In the first timers and novice categories which I competed in, 2 of the blokes that actually placed ahead of me didn't have the greatest physiques, but they were the best posers up there on the stage. And that's what got them the spots up on the podium. Now, before I start to talk about how we can integrate hypertrophy into your hybrid training routine, what I'm gonna add in as a bit of a present for you guys is a couple of pictures of myself with the spray tan, This was a very interesting experience. Basically, to explain this, I went to the spray tan place the day before the competition. Now, this spray tan clinic, or whatever you would like to call it, was used to working with bodybuilding competitors. So they asked me what category I was going into and what shorts I needed to wear. And I got it wrong, so I ended up wearing a disposable G-string, and I walked into this spray tan room, and there was like a 16 or 17-year-old girl who was doing this spray tan for me. And the most fucked up moment was when I was standing there, not facing her, and I had to like spread my legs and get spray tan in all the bits, even though I didn't realize I was wearing the wrong shorts for it. So I got more tan than I actually needed. And I'm telling you, this disposable G-string did not leave much to the imagination when it came to the male genitalia. However, I hope you enjoyed some of the images there. But moving on to the next point, how can we integrate hypertrophy training or bodybuilding style training into our hybrid training routine? Firstly, let's talk about how hypertrophy training could actually complement other parts of our performance. First of all, when it comes to maximal strength, as I've talked about before, if we can build a larger muscle or a larger engine, we therefore increase the capacity for that muscle to become stronger. So hypertrophy training can directly influence your ability to become stronger. However, it's a little different when we start to look at the endurance side of things, especially when it comes to running. Having too much muscle mass in areas that don't actually help your running at all is likely to slow you down and make you a little less economic. Try visualizing a pro bodybuilder on the IFBB stage trying to do a marathon. Their running technique is probably going to look very sluggish and awkward. So whilst it's good to increase some muscle mass, attempting to be a professional bodybuilder and train for a marathon is definitely going to influence your running performance. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't do it, but just don't expect the best from both worlds. If you wanted to disregard endurance and just focus on bodybuilding and powerlifting, they might actually go pretty damn well together. However, that's not what we're discussing today. Whilst it's good to increase your muscle mass to a degree, going too far to one end of the spectrum is going to cause detriment to other elements of your performance. To look at this from another angle though, if you are someone that is more of a runner trying to get into strength training, increasing your muscle mass is not only going to be good for your health, but it could potentially influence your performance as well. As I said, if you've got a bigger muscle and that becomes stronger, that has the potential to then improve your running performance. However, something very interesting that I learned through a hybrid training course was the fact that there's actually some athletes out there that in their off seasons will increase their muscle mass. So when they're doing their ultra endurance events, if they can't get enough nutrition through their food and they're low on body fat as well, they've potentially got more muscle to use as a fuel source during these ultra endurance events. So one important thing that we do want to touch on when it comes to balancing hybrid training, and in particular bodybuilding style training and endurance training, is that you don't want one to collide with the other. So you'll want to schedule your training in a way and design your training program in a way that doesn't cause your running to be negatively impacted too much by your bodybuilding training, or your bodybuilding training to be negatively impacted too much by your running. Now, given the fact that we want to be in an anabolic state when it comes to building muscle, this makes it very challenging because in endurance events, we are in a catabolic state. So something that is super important when it comes to hybrid training and integrating these two qualities together is your nutrition. Now, when I'm talking about an anabolic state, I'm talking about your body being in a state where it's got enough resources to actually prepare and build muscle. Now, in a catabolic state, this is where your body is trying to mobilize and find energy to use as a resource to keep fueling activity. So how do we prevent muscle loss and increase muscle growth during both activities? Well, we want to make sure that we've got adequate resources available. When it comes to repairing and building muscle mass, this means having enough amino acids available for your muscles to actually maintain these processes. Having amino acids in your bloodstream also means that your body isn't going to be as likely to dive into muscle protein stores to find this energy. On the other hand, having carbohydrate in your bloodstream or glycogen within the muscle means that you'll have more of a protein sparing effect as well. So to address this at both ends, we want to make sure that we are consuming adequate protein intake, which as a general rule of thumb could be 1.6 to 2.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. And we would prefer to evenly distribute this throughout the day. And when it comes to both protein and carbohydrates, it really does depend on who you are, what your weight is, your height is, what your gender is, what your age is, how active your lifestyle or your occupation is, how many steps are you doing a day, and obviously the amount of training and types of training that you're doing. Now, when it comes to your fats, usually I just recommend meeting the minimum requirements for fats, so we have enough to maintain basic bodily functions. But given that carbohydrates is going to be our preferred fuel source for the types of training that we're doing, after consuming our protein and fat intake, we want to make up the rest of our calories from carbohydrates. You can be eating these in your breakfast, lunch, dinner, but you really want to prioritize having carbohydrates prior maybe even during and following training sessions. And this is going to be one of the most effective strategies that you can use to ward off muscle loss and increase muscle gain if you are integrating bodybuilding style training and endurance training together. Now, when it comes to how heavy or how many sets and reps you should be doing when it comes to hypertrophy, the general guidelines based on science do vary. There is a pretty wide bandwidth when it comes to the repetitions for hypertrophy, and that's anywhere between 5 to 30 and more. However, what would make sense here is to do your big heavy lifts like your squat, bench and deadlifts, probably between that 5 to 10 rep range. And some of your more isolated movements or machine movements, maybe in that 8, 10, 12 to 15 rep range and possibly more. One thing I would keep in mind here is that the higher volume or the high amount of repetitions that you have throughout your training, the high amounts of sets as well, this is going to create more fatigue. And like we said, we don't want one type of our training to negatively impact the other. And whilst this does tend to happen with hybrid training, we want to reduce the total magnitude of that by giving ourselves the minimal effective dose with our hypertrophy and our strength training in the gym. That might mean sticking to lower set and repetition ranges whilst maintaining a relatively high intensity. Now, when it comes to intensity, we can use reps in reserve, being how many reps we have left in the tank, or RPE, how hard it is out of 10, as a scale for how heavy we could be lifting. As a general rule of thumb, usually you don't want to be lifting with anything more than 3 or 4 reps left in the tank, depending on the exercises that you're doing. Okay, so what does this actually look like on paper? So off the top of my dome, I'm going to give you a similar training layout to the one we had last week. So let's say we strength train on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and we run on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. And Sunday can be an active recovery or a rest day. Let's also say that you are interested in building a little bit more strength. On the Monday, the Wednesday, and the Friday. On the Monday, I would still look at starting with a squat. On the Wednesday, I'd look at starting with a bench press. And on the Friday, I'd look at starting with a deadlift. And let's call these our powerlifting or our maximal strength movements. Now, given that the focus is now hypertrophy, our other exercises are going to be more focused on training certain muscle groups. Now, this might vary based on the muscles that you actually want to bring out more. However, as a general guideline, if you're using this full body hypertrophy training approach, make sure in each workout that you've got something to target the quads, the hamstrings, the chest, the back. Maybe one day you'll have some biceps and triceps. Another day might be some more shoulder work. One of the days might have a little bit more isolated hamstring and quadricep work. There could be a little bit of carbs in here as well. I'd definitely opt in to have a rotational movement, some flexion and some side to side flexion in here for your core as well. So the Tuesday will be our higher intensity interval running, and this is where we're going to be working above our lactate threshold. An example of this would be having a 10-minute warm up and maybe a 10-minute cool down. And in between this, we might be doing some tempo intervals. As an example, this might be 4 to 8 minute working intervals with about half the rest of the actual working interval. So a 4-minute working interval might have 2 minutes rest, an 8-minute working interval, 4 minutes rest. Now you might have 4 to 5 rounds of this, anywhere up to 6, 7, or 8. It just really depends on your experience with running training and also your total capacity to handle this sort of training volume. Now I'm going to contradict what I just said before about having these full body days by making this Wednesday a little bit more upper body biased, given that we've just done a harder running day. And then when it comes to a Thursday, maybe having an easy run. This might be 30 to 60 minutes of zone 1 to 2 running. Or it could be something like cycling as well. Now, when it comes to Friday, this is where you're going to be starting off with your deadlift. And like I said, with these full body sessions, you're going to have a chest movement, back movement. We've got some quads and maybe hamstrings in there as well. We might have another exercise for that, or even a single leg exercise. You're going to have a core movement. And if you've done arms on another day and shoulders on another day, maybe you want to pay a little bit more attention to the legs here. If not, you could probably double up on the arms or the shoulders as well. Now, when it comes to the Saturday, if you want the rest day, take the rest day and do your long run on the Sunday. However, whatever day you run on, you might use the Saturday or the Sunday, given that you've got more time in your week to do this longer run. This could be 60 to 90 minutes. For some people, this can go up to 2 hours and even longer. The main point of this run is that you're building up your ability to run longer distances over time. You're increasing your aerobic endurance, but you're also building up tissue tolerance in your body. So your muscles, your tendons, your bones can handle more forces during these longer runs over time. Now, when it comes to the rest day, you might want to do some recovery, which might just mean chilling, or it might mean going for a hot girl or hot boy walk, doing some hiking, doing a little bit of yoga or Pilates, or maybe doing some sort of recovery, like some sauna or some cold plunges. Let's talk a little bit about the common mistakes that are made with integrating hybrid training and hypertrophy or bodybuilding training together. We already discussed some of the challenges that I faced and the mistakes I made leading up to my bodybuilding competition. But what about when I've actually been combining hypertrophy training, strength training, running, and Muay Thai at times? Just as we talked about last week, you need to manage your overall training load. If you're constantly getting fatigued, sick, injured, these are surefire signs that there is something off with your training load management and or your nutrition. So 3 things that I want to touch on when it comes to managing your training load is A, making sure that not every day is a high intensity training day. You'll see that I highlighted in that program that Wednesday is more upper body based and the Thursday is an easy run. Now, given that you're not going to be lifting as much weight for your upper body, unless you're a dude that doesn't train legs, this is probably going to be a lower intensity day for you. Now, when it comes to your easy run, this is also going to be low intensity, at least it should be. So we've got higher intensity points at the start and end of the week, but we drop the intensity down midweek. Another way to do this is to train high and low. So from Monday to Saturday, it could be a high intensity, low intensity, high intensity, low intensity, high intensity, low intensity, rest. This is a common approach that some people take. And all we are trying to do here is to optimize the training stimulus, recovery time, and adaptations. Now, the second thing that I want to talk about is these individual training sessions. You want to find the minimal effective dose to actually get the outcome you're looking for. This doesn't mean that you should be hitting 30 to 40 sets in your strength training sessions, nor does it mean in your first interval training sessions that you need to be doing 10 repetitions. A lot of the time it comes down to testing and prodding, seeing what your body can handle, what it adapts to, and using this as data to either increase or reduce your training volume over time. Now, the third point I want to touch on is what we spoke about last week, which is deloads. Put simply, you can either proactively or reactively deload. This means you could plan out a deload every 4 to 6 weeks if you know there's a recurring pattern of you becoming fatigued, sick, or ill at these times, or you just start to become really run down and your performance starts to plateau from your training. On the other hand, you can reactively deload, which means as you start to notice some of these symptoms, you then take the option to deload and allow your body to recover. Now, the second big point I want to touch on is your nutrition. So how do we avoid overestimating and underestimating how much we need to eat? Well, we should be tracking our calorie intake and our calorie output. So whether you're tracking your calorie intake with something like MyFitnessPal, and you've got a wearable device that starts to track your energy output. Another thing that you can track in conjunction to this is changes in your body composition or your weight on the scales. If you tend to notice that you're losing weight over time and this isn't the objective, or the opposite happens and you're gaining weight and this isn't your goal, then you know that you need to increase your energy intake if you're losing weight, or decrease your energy intake if you're gaining weight. Now, given that you're getting adequate protein, what I would recommend for you here is to adjust your carbohydrate intake. If you're still not sure about what to do with nutrition, feel free to send me a message and I'd be more than happy to help you out. Now, finally, the last point that I want to touch on is the psychological impacts of bodybuilding training. As I discussed, I got a very distorted relationship with food, but also with my own body. Now, this is where I believe having a performance-focused body transformation approach is an absolute key. Remembering at the end of the day, that food is something that we use to fuel our body, and our nutrition can be adjusted to adjust our body composition and our performance. Eat less food, lose more fat. Eat more food, build more muscle. Eat enough or more food, improve your performance, generally speaking. Something else that I would add to this is the fact that the body composition that you want might not be the body composition that actually allows you to perform at your best. Like I explained earlier, when I was at my leanest point, I definitely wasn't my strongest nor my fittest because I wasn't able to train at my best. I didn't have enough energy coming through my diet to fuel my training and recovery because my focus was purely on body composition. So when it comes to having this performance-focused body transformation approach, regardless of if you're in a deficit, you're eating at maintenance, or you're eating in a surplus, you need to understand that your body is more than just an object to look at, but it is capable of becoming very strong, powerful, and durable. It is able to coordinate itself and learn so many new skills. So whilst it's cool to appear really lean, vascular, and muscular, at the end of the day, we should not only appreciate our body for how it looks, but also how it performs. And you need to take this same approach when it comes to your nutrition. Nutrition is not just a tool to strip body fat, it is a tool to help your body perform at its absolute best. So I hope you take away a bit of a value and maybe had a couple of giggles at some of the stories in today's video about my experience with bodybuilding and how to integrate it into a hybrid training routine. If you want to see more content like this in future, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell. If you like this video today, give it the thumbs up. Now, if you're someone looking to build a leaner, stronger, and more endurable body, if what we discussed with managing training load and managing nutrition and also keeping a healthy mindset, if these are some of the challenges that you are facing, then I would highly recommend that you consider my Hybrid Transformation 2.0 program. This online coaching program is designed to help you build a leaner, stronger, and more endurable body with hybrid training and without unsustainable dieting. And at the end of the day, my main aim with this program is to help you build more self-confidence. That's it for today, guys. So next time we're going to be talking about my experience with training for a Muay Thai fight and how to integrate combat sports into a hybrid training routine. Until then, I hope you have a bloody great week and I will see you next time.